I knew something had shifted the moment my boyfriend's mother dropped the crystal glass. It didn't shatter. It landed on the carpet with a soft thud, wine spreading like a dark stain across the white fibers. But she didn't look down. She was looking at me, at my hands, at the way I had just opened her husband's shirt collar, tilted his head back, and told everyone in the room to stay calm while I checked his pulse. 30 seconds earlier, he had been laughing about golf. Now he was on the floor, and I was the only person in that dining room who wasn't frozen. But that moment came later. Let me start from the beginning. I met Daniel at a farmer's market in Portland on a Saturday morning in October. He was holding a bag of apples and asking the vendor which ones were best for pie. I told him Granny Smith, without thinking. He turned around, smiled, and said he didn't know anyone under 60 who still baked pies. I told him I didn't bake. I just knew things about keeping people alive, and apples happened to fall into that general category. He laughed. That was the beginning. Daniel was an architect, not the kind who designed skyscrapers, the kind who renovated old houses in the suburbs and posted the results on Instagram. He was good at it, careful, patient, proud of his work in a quiet way. He wore flannel shirts and drove a truck that always had sawdust in the back seat. When he asked what I did, I said I worked at the hospital. He nodded. Like admin or something? Something like that, I said. And that was the first time I chose not to correct someone. Not because I was ashamed of what I did, but because I was tired of what happened when people found out. I was a trauma surgeon, not just any trauma surgeon. At 31, I was the youngest attending in the emergency surgical department at OHSU, one of the top trauma centers on the West Coast. I had published 9 papers, trained under 2 of the most respected surgeons in the country, and spent 14 months doing emergency medicine in humanitarian zones overseas before I turned 28. My hands had held people's hearts, literally. And every time someone learned that about me, the conversation died and something else took its place. A kind of careful distance that felt like reverence but wasn't. It was measurement. They measured themselves against me, and the space between us grew. With Daniel, I didn't want that space. So I let him believe I worked in hospital administration. I talked about long shifts, paperwork, difficult days. All true, just incomplete. He never pressed for details. He was the kind of man who respected boundaries, even the ones he didn't know existed. We dated for a year and a half before he proposed. By then, I had convinced myself the omission didn't matter. It was just a job title. It wasn't who I was. Except it was. When Daniel told me his parents wanted to meet me, he said it casually, like it was no big deal. They're having a dinner party at their house next weekend. Just family, a few of their friends, nothing fancy. I asked what his parents were like. He paused. My dad's a businessman. Retired now, but he still talks like he's running the company. My mom's involved in charity work. They're good people. Traditional. I nodded and didn't ask more. But what I heard between the lines was clear enough. They cared about appearances, about accomplishments, about whether the woman their son was marrying measured up to whatever standard they had already set in their minds. I decided to go as myself. Not the surgeon, just me. The drive to Lake Oswego took about 20 minutes. Their house sat at the end of a private road lined with dogwood trees. It was the kind of house that whispered money instead of shouting it. Stone facade, landscaped garden, a front door that looked like it belonged on a New England estate. Daniel squeezed my hand as we walked up. "You look great," he said. "Don't be nervous." I wasn't nervous. I was curious. His mother opened the door. She was elegant in the way that takes effort to look effortless. Silk blouse, pearl earrings, hair pinned just so. She smiled and hugged me lightly, the kind of hug that doesn't wrinkle fabric. "You must be the famous girlfriend," she said. "We've heard so much." I smiled back. "All good things, I hope." She didn't answer that directly. His father appeared behind her. Tall, silver-haired, firm handshake. He looked at me the way experienced men look at people they are sizing up, not unkindly, but thoroughly. "Welcome," he said. "Make yourself at home." There were other guests already inside. 2 couples, friends of the family. One was a retired judge, the other ran a real estate development firm. Everyone was dressed well, spoke carefully, and held their wine glasses by the stem. The living room smelled like fresh flowers and something roasting in the kitchen. Daniel introduced me by name and nothing else. "This is my fiancé." His mother tilted her head. She waited for more. When nothing came, she filled the gap herself. "So what do you do, dear?" "I work at the hospital," I said. "Administration." She smiled politely. "That must keep you busy." The retired judge's wife leaned in. "My niece works at a hospital too. Billing department. It's such thankless work." I nodded. "It can be." Daniel's father was already talking to someone else. He hadn't reacted to my answer at all. Not dismissal exactly, just disinterest. The kind that comes naturally when someone doesn't register as important in a room full of people who believe they are. Dinner was served in a formal dining room with 12 chairs and a chandelier that probably cost more than my first car. His mother had arranged place cards. I was seated between Daniel and the real estate developer's wife, far from his father who sat at the head of the table. The food was excellent. Herb-crusted lamb, roasted vegetables, a complicated salad with ingredients I couldn't name. Daniel's mother brought out each course herself, though I suspected someone in the kitchen had done the actual cooking. Conversation followed a familiar rhythm: business, investments, property values. The retired judge told a story about a case he had won decades ago. The real estate developer talked about a new project in Bend. Daniel's father listened and occasionally offered commentary that made it clear he considered himself the most experienced person in the room. At no point did anyone ask me a question that went deeper than "Where are you from and how did you two meet?" At one point, the developer's wife turned to me. "So do you think you'll keep working after the wedding?" I looked at her. "Yes," I said. She smiled the way people smile when they think they're being generous. "That's nice. Having something to do." I felt Daniel shift beside me. Not uncomfortably. More like he had heard this kind of talk before and had learned to sit through it. His silence was not agreement. But it wasn't objection either. And sometimes the absence of objection is its own kind of statement. After the main course, Daniel's mother began talking about her charity work, a fundraiser for a children's hospital, specifically for the new surgical wing. She described the gala, the donors, the speeches. She talked about the surgeons she had met, their brilliance, their dedication. She used the word heroic twice. I listened quietly. I had operated in rooms funded by galas just like that one. I had been the surgeon standing under those lights, hands inside a child's chest, making decisions in seconds that would determine whether a family went home whole or shattered. But in that dining room, I was just the girl who worked in administration. His father eventually turned to me. He had been quiet for most of the meal, observing more than participating. "Daniel tells me you're from a small town," he said. I nodded. "Ohio," I replied. He smiled. "Heartland girl, that's good. Builds character." I agreed. "It does." He leaned forward. "Let me give you some advice," he said, in a tone that made it clear he didn't think I had any. "In this family, we believe in contribution. Everyone brings something to the table." I met his eyes. "I understand," I said. He nodded, satisfied that his message had been delivered. I wondered what he would say if he knew that the last thing I had brought to a table was a set of titanium surgical retractors to repair a ruptured aorta on a 19-year-old who had been in a car accident on I-5. But I said nothing. Dessert was a lemon tart with powdered sugar on top. Daniel's mother served it proudly. The conversation drifted to plans for the holidays, to vacations, to things that cost money and signaled status. I was beginning to feel invisible in a way that was both uncomfortable and clarifying. Not erased, just uncounted. The way people become when others have already decided their value. Then it happened. Daniel's father was mid-sentence, describing a ski trip to Aspen. When he stopped talking, his hand went to his chest. Not dramatically, not clutching, just pressing. His face changed color. Not white exactly, but a grayish pallor I had seen hundreds of times before. His eyes went wide, then unfocused. He tried to stand. His legs didn't cooperate. He went down sideways, knocking his chair back against the wall. Everyone froze. His mother screamed his name. Daniel stood up so fast his chair fell over. The judge's wife grabbed her husband's arm. The developer reached for his phone, and I was already moving. I was beside him in 2 seconds. I loosened his collar, checked his airway, placed 2 fingers on his carotid artery. His pulse was there but irregular, rapid, his breathing was shallow, his skin was clammy. I looked up at Daniel. Call 911. Tell them possible cardiac event. Male, 67, conscious but altered. Give them this address. Daniel stared at me. Now, Daniel. He grabbed his phone. I turned to his mother. Do you have aspirin in the house? She blinked. I think in the bathroom. Get it. 1 tablet. I turned his father onto his back, elevated his legs slightly using a cushion from the nearest chair. I kept my fingers on his pulse, counting, monitoring. His eyes found mine. What's happening? He whispered. You're having a cardiac episode, I said calmly. Paramedics are on their way. You're going to be fine. He stared at me. The same man who had given me advice about contribution 10 minutes earlier was now looking at me like I was the only solid thing in a room that had turned to water. His mother returned with the aspirin. I told him to chew it, not swallow. I checked his pulse again. Still irregular but not weakening. I asked the judge's wife if she could bring a blanket. I kept talking to his father. Steady, calm, professional. The same tone I used in the trauma bay when everything around me was chaos, but the patient needed to believe someone was in control. The paramedics arrived in 7 minutes. I met them at the door and gave them a full report. Onset of symptoms, duration, vitals, aspirin administered at minute 3. The lead paramedic looked at me. Are you medical? I'm a trauma surgeon at OHSU, I said. He nodded. Good call on all of it. They loaded Daniel's father onto the stretcher. As they wheeled him out, he reached for my hand. I held it briefly. You're going to be fine, I said again. He didn't let go right away. Thank you, he said. His voice cracked. The room was silent after they left. Daniel stood in the middle of the dining room, phone still in his hand. His mother sat in a chair, trembling. The guests looked at each other, and then everyone looked at me. Daniel spoke first. You're a surgeon? His voice was quiet, not angry, confused. Yes, I said. A trauma surgeon. His mother's hand went to her mouth. The judge's wife whispered something to her husband. The real estate developer put his phone down slowly. Daniel shook his head. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at him. I told you I worked at the hospital. You said administration. I said something like that. He ran his hand through his hair. That's not the same thing. No, I agreed. It isn't. The silence that followed was heavy, not with accusation, but with recalibration. Everyone in that room was rearranging their image of me, shifting categories, updating assumptions. The girl from Ohio who worked in hospital admin was now the surgeon who had just saved the host's life on the dining room floor. Nothing about me had changed, but the way they looked at me was completely different. We followed the ambulance to the hospital. Daniel drove without speaking. I sat in the passenger seat, hands folded in my lap, watching the streetlights pass. At the hospital, we waited. His father was stable. A minor cardiac event, not a full heart attack. They kept him overnight for observation. When the attending cardiologist came out to update the family, he recognized me. Dr. Herrera, he said. Didn't expect to see you here on a Saturday. I smiled politely. Just visiting. Daniel watched the exchange. The cardiologist spoke to me like a colleague, not a visitor. He used medical terminology without simplifying it. He asked my opinion on follow-up protocols. Daniel's mother looked at me like she was seeing a stranger for the first time. On the drive home, Daniel finally spoke. How long have you been a surgeon? Since I was 27, I said. Residency before that? Starting at 23. He gripped the steering wheel. So, the whole time we've been together. Yes, he exhaled. Why? I looked out the window. Because the last 3 men I dated treated me differently the moment they found out. One became competitive. One became intimidated. One told me I made him feel like less of a man. I wanted someone who saw me before they saw my title. He was quiet for a long time. And did I? Did you what? See you? I thought about it. Yes, I said. You did, until tonight. He flinched. We didn't talk much for the next 2 days. Not because we were fighting, because we were both sitting with something uncomfortable. For me, it was the realization that hiding had become a habit, one I used to protect myself from judgment, but that also prevented real intimacy. For Daniel, it was something else. Something I could see in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. like he was recalculating the distance between us and finding it larger than he had imagined. On the third day, he came to me while I was making coffee. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you disappointed in me?" "For what?" "For not defending you at dinner. Before everything happened." I was honest, I noticed. He nodded, looking down. "They talked about you like you were furniture." And I just sat there. Why? Because that's how it's always been. My parents talk. I listen. I don't push back. He paused. I think I was raised to believe that silence is respect. I set my coffee down. Silence at the table while your fiancé is being measured and dismissed isn't respect, Daniel. It's permission. He didn't argue. That mattered more than any apology. His father came home from the hospital 2 days later. He called me that evening. Not Daniel, me. He cleared his throat the way men do when they're about to say something that costs them. "I want to thank you properly," he said. "For what you did." I told him it wasn't necessary. "It is," he said, "and not just for the medical part." I waited. "The way I spoke to you at dinner," he continued, "before everything happened. The advice I gave you about contribution." He paused. I was speaking to someone I had already decided wasn't important. "That's not something I'm proud of." "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. He was quiet for a moment. "My wife told me you're one of the top surgeons in the state. She looked you up." I didn't respond. "I've spent my career believing I could judge people in 5 minutes," he said. "And I sat across from you for 2 hours and didn't see anything." "You saw what you expected to see," I said gently. "That's human." "Maybe," he replied. "But it's not good enough." That conversation stayed with me. Not because it was redemptive, but because it was honest. He wasn't pretending to be a different person. He was acknowledging the one he had been. Over the next few weeks, the dynamic shifted. His mother called me more often. She asked about my work, my research, my patients. She sent me articles about medical breakthroughs and asked if I had seen them. She invited me to speak at her charity gala. She introduced me to her friends as a brilliant surgeon instead of Daniel's girlfriend. And every time she did, I felt the same quiet discomfort. Not because the attention was unwelcome, but because it was conditional. She wasn't interested in me at dinner when I was nobody. She was interested now because I was somebody. The admiration was real, but the catalyst was status. And that difference mattered to me more than I could explain. Daniel noticed it too. One evening, he said something that surprised me. "They like you now because of what you do. I wonder if they even know who you are." I looked at him. "Do you?" He met my eyes. "I'm trying to." That was the most honest thing he had ever said. We had a long conversation that night. Not about his parents. About us. About the fact that I had hidden a fundamental part of my life from the person I was supposed to trust most. About the fact that he had never once asked me a follow-up question about my work in 18 months. Not once. He had accepted administration and moved on. I asked him why. He thought about it. "I guess I didn't think it mattered," he said. "I loved you either way." I believed him, but I also heard what that meant. He hadn't been curious about my inner world. He had loved the version of me that was convenient, uncomplicated, non-threatening. And when the real version emerged, he didn't know what to do with her. "Do you feel different about me now?" I asked. He hesitated. "I feel like I don't know you as well as I thought I did." "That's fair," I said. "But do you want to?" He reached for my hand. "Yes, but I need to ask you something first." "Go ahead." "If I had been the one hiding something, if I were a janitor instead of an architect, would you still be with me?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." He looked at me. "You answered that fast. Because the answer is simple," I said. "You treated me well when you thought I was no one. That's why I fell in love with you. Not your job, not your house. Your hands, holding apples, asking a stranger about pie." He smiled. For the first time in days, it was real. The following month, we attended another dinner at his parents' house. Smaller this time, just family. His mother brought out the good china. His father pulled out my chair. They asked about my latest surgery, about my research, about whether I had considered teaching. They were warm, attentive, eager, and I was grateful. But I also noticed what was missing. They never asked about my childhood. They never asked what made me laugh. They never asked what scared me. They asked about the surgeon, not about the woman. After dinner, I sat with his father on the porch. The air was cool and smelled like pine. He was quiet for a while. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I keep thinking about what you said." That I saw what I expected to see. I nodded. "I've done that my whole life," he continued. "Sorted people into categories. Useful. Not useful. Important. Not important." He looked at his hands. "I did it to my own son. Daniel doesn't know this, but when he told me he wanted to be an architect instead of going into business, I was disappointed. I didn't say it, but he felt it. He always felt it. I listened. "It took me years to respect what he does," he said. "And even now, I catch myself comparing him to people with bigger titles." He looked at me. "You showed me what that feels like from the other side." I didn't respond right away. I thought about all the patients I had treated who had walked into my trauma bay as strangers. I never asked what they did for a living before I saved their lives. I never checked their job title before I held their hand. Everyone who came through those doors was just a person in pain. And that was enough. "I think the hardest thing in the world," I said finally, "is treating people the same, regardless of what they can do for you." He nodded slowly. "I'm not sure I know how." "You start by noticing," I said. He looked at the sky. "I think I'm beginning to." Months later, Daniel and I set a new date for the wedding. Small ceremony. Outdoor. No titles on the invitations. Just names. I wore a simple dress. He wore a suit that still had sawdust on the cuffs from a project he had finished that morning. I loved that detail. His father stood up to give a toast. He held his glass with a hand that still trembled slightly, a reminder of that night. He looked at me, and then at the small crowd. "I spent most of my life believing I could measure a person's worth in the first 5 minutes," he said. "Their job, their handshake, their confidence." He paused. "And then one night, a woman I had dismissed as unimportant saved my life on my own dining room floor." He cleared his throat. "She didn't save me because of who I was. She saved me because of who she is, and I've been trying to learn from that ever since." The room was quiet. Daniel squeezed my hand. I didn't cry. I just breathed, deeply, like I was finally taking off a coat I had been wearing for too long. Looking back, I don't think what happened was about revenge or proving a point. It was about truth. The kind that only surfaces when the labels are removed. We live in a world that teaches us to admire credentials more than character, to listen to power more than kindness, to respect resumes more than the person holding them. And sometimes it takes a crisis, a moment when none of that matters, to see the person who has been sitting across from you all along. If this story made you think about the way you treat people before you know their title, or the way people treat you when they think you have nothing to offer, then it did what I hoped it would do. Because the truest version of someone's character isn't how they behave when they're impressed. It's how they behave when they're indifferent. And the truest version of love isn't choosing someone who matches your status. It's choosing someone whose presence feels like home, whether they're holding a scalpel or a bag of apples. If you believe that dignity and quiet strength still matter in this world, I'd be grateful if you shared this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to stay for more stories like this one, consider subscribing. Because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one nobody noticed.